I mean, we saw repetitive questioning going on.
Yeah.
These senators seem to like to hear themselves ask questions and hear their answers.
Oh, boy, yes, they do, E. Very much so, and ultimately the same kind of almost felt like we were watching two hearings. One very heavy on Russia and General Flynn and that involvement, and then there almost seemed to be a whole additional hearing about Sally Yates and this executive order. And I think it was very fascinating to me when we saw Senator Ted Cruz with his questioning about the travel ban and things like this. But ultimately, Chairman Graham wrapping up talking about one thing I think hopefully we can all agree on in a bipartisan way. We know at least there was an attempt by Russia, E, to influence our election, and what are we going to do about it?
Mm-hmm. And, Kat, we should also note that Susan Rice was also asked to come to testify in front of the Senate panel, but chose not to.
She chose not to.
Wasn't subpoenaed.
Right.
But one of the early questions, I believe Lindsey Graham, right out of the box, asked James Clapper, did Flynn break any laws? Was there any proof of collusion with the Russians? And again, Clapper was incapable of saying yes. He said no, there was no collusion.
No, so then they went on for several hours of hypotheticals. So if he had done this on this day with this, just would it? And it got so confusing that even anyone who's being asked the questions, Yates was saying, wait, if who? If what? So, I mean, I feel like Trump is probably going to come out against this. He did ahead of the hearing saying, you know, Flynn had a security clearance. But I think there's going to be more of that. And again, it's interesting. We should all care about Russia. We should all care about our own security and our own privacy. But yeah, if there's no evidence, then there's no evidence.
Dana, so at one point there was no evidence of illegal activity, no collusion. We should note that Flynn was fired not because there was some sort of collusion going on or a suspicion of collusion, but he was fired because he misled the vice president.
He was insubordinate. He was fired because he was insubordinate. He wasn't fired because there was any evidence of wrongdoing. And I might add that took them as how many hours? How many hours did this go on? 3 hours. Over 3 hours. It felt like 11. But it took them this long to establish that, look, yes, he was insubordinate and he was immediately fired. Once they knew that he had done something wrong, he was immediately dismissed from the administration. Now, everything that we know about the payment from RT and him giving a speech, et cetera, everything that we knew about this, we also knew under the previous administration, and yet nothing was done then. So if it was so concerning, why didn't the Obama administration do anything about it? Because we knew this stuff in 2015.
Yeah, Governor Richardson, it's a very good point that Dana makes, that one of the instances that they're accusing General Flynn of misdoing or wrongdoing happened in 2015 under Barack Obama presidency.
Security clearances are done by professionals, by the FBI, by the law enforcement people in the agencies. Look, Eric, this was not a good day for the Trump administration.
Well, why do you say that, though?
Because
I mean,
you have two career officials that have served in Republican and Democratic administrations. Basically, one, enormous collusion by Russia. One.
Well, hold on. Are you talking about Flynn?
Two. No. I'm talking about in general. Clapper talking about.
He said there was no collusion, no evidence of collusion.
And can we trust him because he did lie under oath before?
In the election, there was. I'm not talking about Flynn. Number two, Sally Yates talking about the potential compromising of General Flynn. Sally Yates, a 27-year career prosecutor, talking about a number of instances where General Flynn misled his own administration.
Yeah, but that's not illegal, sir. There's nothing illegal about that.
That's not the point.
And pointing out that there was no collusion. Also, Sally Yates, we need to point out, was appointed by Barack Obama, and during this time in question, the Trump administration was pretty hard on the Obama administration.
No, but 27 years she served under George Bush. She served on Republican Democratic administration. 27 years, a career prosecutor. You know, just because she was acting attorney general at the time, she did what she thought was right. One, to tell the White House counsel that there were potential problems in General Flynn misleading the administration about his contacts with the Russian ambassador. And secondly, that he could have been compromised.
But he was fired for that. He was fired by the Trump
administration.
But I think
what is needed here is an independent commission.
Why?
An independent investigation.
The FBI already cleared him.
No. Of the entire Russian collusion in our electoral process with General Flynn, that is needed. This is what I think, is emanating from this hearing.
Well, why those steps weren't taken, though, under the previous administration? And as we just pointed out and established, I mean, we knew all of this stuff back in 2015, so why wasn't anything done?
Well, because this collusion happened in this 2016 election process.
You keep saying collusion, sir. What are you talking about, collusion?
Collusion.
You just heard the Director of National Intelligence say, who oversees the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA, saying we have no evidence of collusion. How can you make this claim?
Coming forward with going into our state election system, our federal election system.
There's no proof of that. You're
what do you mean
making
no
a
proof
claim
of that?
out here on national television.
Can I clear up?
I think there's no collusion. There's no Russian collusion in the 2016 election.
You're speculating, sir.
I think you two gentlemen are using collusion differently, right? I hear the governor saying collusion about Russia's attempt to be involved in our election period. But I think you're hearing collusion speaking specifically about General Flynn. I think what we heard Clapper saying today is, no, they can't make a conclusion around the effect of the involvement, but I think we do know, in fact, there was an attempt to have involvement on our election. That much we are.
I will tell you what we do know.
And everybody should be concerned about, regardless of what your party affiliation is.
There was a law broken, and this was repeatedly asked of Clapper and of Yates. Ebony, weigh in on this. Sure. The unmasking of Flynn's name is one thing, but the leaking of Flynn's name, illegal.
I am so glad you bring this up. In the very beginning, this is the first distinction we're told. Unmasking can be authorized and legal. Leaking, always unauthorized, always illegal. Those are two very different things. If it's an unmasking and it's relevant to national security, okay. If it's a leak, absolutely, it has to be prosecuted.
Kat, James Clapper pointed out that, hey, there may be, right at the end, very important testimony right at the end. We were about to come back to us. And he said, well, yeah, there may be other investigations going on of other individuals. Does that concern you?
Of course it does, and it shouldn't. And Dana, as you brought up, Clapper, don't really trust him either. I watched this and I'm like,
some credibility
really?
problems there.
You have to look back in the past. He's lied under oath before, and then all this came out, and people just forget that. But yeah, of course, I mean, this isn't going to go away. This hasn't gone away so far. And all of you say this is about older things. This is about the election, the executive order they were talking about, that ban. He's already got a new one out now. So these are about older things, and this is going to continue. And, you know, she said a lot of things were part of the classified ongoing investigation. More and more is going to come out. So I think that we should all kind of withhold judgment.
All right, but I think on the leaking, yeah, that wasn't right.
Of course.
But the focus should be on the substance of the potential collusion involvement of the... Who leaks? Who do you know? Well, how do you know? Are you blaming Sally Yates? What are you doing?
I'm saying that
that is wrong to shift the blame to the leaking instead of the substance of the allegations.
I would say that
this is very serious.
I would say that the leaking most likely came from the Yates organization.
How do you know that?
How do you know that? There's no way to know that.
You have no way of knowing that. That is totally false.
All right, do me a favor. Let's take a listen to this, and we'll talk about how important this is and how we know how, or they were asked, what's the story with these leaks. Take a listen. Soundbite number one, guys.
How did the conversation between the Russian ambassador and Mr. Flynn make it to the Washington Post?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. Nor do I know the answer to that.
There should be a record somewhere in our system whether or not an unmasking request was made for the conversation between Mr. Flynn and the Russian ambassador.
Yes.
Has any classified information relating to Mr. Trump or his associates been declassified and shared with the media?
Not to my knowledge.
Ms. Yates?
Not to my knowledge either.
Okay.
All right, we'll bring it around now. Go ahead, start with Dana and bring it across the table. I mean, look, it's bleeding, it's screaming. The inside of this Sally Yates administration was likely the source of this leak.
Well, and I know that there's been a lawsuit filed. I believe it's Judicial Watch that filed a suit wanting to look at her emails. Here we go with another email story. Wanting to look at her emails to see if there was any sort of discussion about that. You know, time will tell. There's a lot that we don't know, and I think Kat made a really good point. There are a lot of moving parts here still. There's a lot that we don't know. However, some of the questioning that I've heard is really centering on, and everyone's presupposing that well, the Trump administration, for all of its faults, they really messed up here. The Trump administration messed up. They should have vetted this guy. They should have done it. We knew this information. Okay, the moment that something was proven to be true, he was gone. He was out of the administration. So what's the problem at this particular
It's a
point?
quick action.
Okay, so I agree with Dana. Look, we cannot put the cart before the horse here. There's so much we don't know. Certainly, I expect we will find out more in upcoming hearings and whatnot. But what we do know, what we do know is that there's an attempt. I'm going to shy away from the word collusion because I think it becomes problematic and argumentative. but certainly we knew absolutely there was an attempt by the Russian government to influence our democracy, our election, our republic. And let's at least work on the fix for that. What are we going to do about that part? Let's get in front of that part, because that much we can agree on.
Agreed.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And this has become kind of a partisan issue. A lot of people wanted to deny that there was any attempt by Russia. Oh, that's so ridiculous. Oh, that's so ridiculous because it makes the party look bad or it might make Trump look bad. But that shouldn't matter because that is something that affects everybody. And we really, really do need to wait. And again, if you're concerned about unmasking, if you're concerned about leaks, you should take a look at data collection and the fact that that is so broad in terms of it can't be leaked. You know, it wouldn't matter if it wasn't unmasked. The scope for unmasking is if it could potentially provide any value to foreign intelligence. That's very broad. So if that's something that you think is harmful, take a look at civil liberties reform. That's what I say always.
Governor, in order to look into a U.S. person's activity, you need a FISA warrant.
Right.
Are we sure this FISA warrant was proper? And then to go even one step further to unmask, have they done everything properly? Had the people who were going after Flynn and the Trump administration done everything they were supposed to be doing?
Well, you know, you have to get FISA is a court order. You have to go to 3 judges. I think the process makes sense. Now, you know, are there imperfections? Possibly. I think General Flynn deserves due process. I do think that. But at the same time, I think Ebony's right. This should never happen again. Russian involvement in our election and the collusion issue. I mean, there's a lot of
You're saying collusion within the Russians to influence ours and other elections around the world.
I mean, look in France. Look in France. Well, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, what we need to do, what are we going to do about it? I think sanctions are needed. We have to be sure this never happens again. And at the same time, I mean, look, these are 2 career officials that have served both administrations that are talking about the significant need for reforms. And we need an independent commission to get to the bottom of what all of you have said. That's what
Governor,
I'm saying.
can I point out toxicity that you're speaking to, and it's so important right now, and I've said this, the Department of Justice, as well as the State Department, as well as our intelligence communities, I would say all 3 have been casualties of this 2016 election by way of credibility, to the point where Americans don't trust intelligence, we don't trust our Department of Justice, and we don't trust our intelligence. And it's a real problem. And until we get on the same page and restore some credibility amongst these agencies, I don't know how we even get on the same page to move forward.
Let me bring this question to Kat Timpf. When the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA say, you know, we've been looking into this, but we don't think it's necessary to unmask General Flynn, yet his name is unmasked because the acting attorney general got involved, is this the country we want to be living in, where these intel agencies may be violating our civil rights, our constitutional rights?
The current standard is that if it could potentially provide any benefit to foreign intelligence, then it can be unmasked. So what she did clearly was politically motivated. I think that that's pretty obvious. However, if you can at least claim that, oh, yeah, but maybe it could have provided some benefit, then you're kind of covered.
Incidental.
So we need to take a look at that at the base level. And a lot of people who are Republicans, I know that you don't feel this way, but a lot of people are okay with a lot of data collection. Take a look at that, because I do think that that's a constitutional violation the way the standard's set right now.
We'll get to Dana, but Governor, what in the world do you think Sally Yates needed to know about who General Flynn was and what he was up to that the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA didn't think was relevant?
She is the person, the Department of Justice, the National Security Advisor, that are the central focus of a lot of this internal investigations. She is the appropriate entity that would warn the President's counsel about this potential violation. That's why she did it. She was Attorney General, acting for 8 days, not very long.
Does that scare you, Dana, when an acting Attorney General...
It does. It does.
Thinks she needs to know more information than our own FBI.
I agree. I feel like it was a little politicized. I wish Susan Rice would have testified as well. I think there's a fear with a lot of individuals in America who are a little conservatarian, libertarian minded, who think, wow, you have this government apparatus that was created to follow people and to protect against domestic terror. And here you have perhaps a good example of how it was used to go after individuals that were politically dissenting or who maybe were going to destroy some politician's legacy after he left the White House.
Eric,
That's very concerning.
Eric, the FBI is under the Department of Justice.
I understand that. I know exactly how the system works. But my point is the FBI is tasked with the investigation part of the equation. And if they said, we got what we need, what does Sally Yates need?
But I don't know, E. I don't know if I want to. Yeah, I don't know if I want to start second guessing our prosecutors around that.
Her boss, I'll go crazy. Yeah. It becomes political. And Sally Yates says, you know what, I want to know this name.
Maybe she needs context.
She's a career prosecutor. She's a career prosecutor, Eric.
We need to know what Susan Rice knows.
No, I agree. Look, I can understand why Susan Rice wouldn't have any incentive to testify, but of course America wants those answers. America is well served by those answers because she knows a lot of information.
Maybe she can blame it on a video.
No, but this was the intelligence community that disclosed the unmasking. It wasn't Susan Rice. Why are you going after her?
Well, because she knows. She knows what. Someone asked these
But it was the intelligence community that does the unmasking.
And the only reason I can come up with is political reasons, certainly not investigative reasons.
I don't understand. What could she have done?
But it's hard to prove that. It's hard to prove what her motivations really were. If she claims it was something else, then
she says context.
She says
she wants more context. She wants more context to talk about whether or not the Constitutionality and all these things are at play.
That's why the standard has to change.
The National Security Advisor is almost the only entity that can ask for this information. And I think she acted properly. She acted honestly. She is, I've known her for many years. She is a woman of high integrity.
Well, wait,
I'm not going to say money. I think
you are talking about the same woman who went on the 5 separate talk shows and blamed the videotape for the attack at Benghazi, and we knew in hindsight
we all agree about Russia. We all agree about Russia. We all agree about Russia. It's very difficult to continue making the claim that you want to get to the bottom of what happened with Russia when so many things become politicized in such a petty fashion, like some of what we saw today.
Let's just be clear and be consistent and get hard on Russia.
We'll do that.